I can't say it really came as a shock to me, but Domination Mode has been a bit polarizing since its introduction. A lot of YouTubers are covering it almost exclusively and really enjoy the game mode, and plenty of viewers are head over heels for it as well. I've seen quite a few subscribers say they're excited to try multiplayer for the first time in Warhammer 3, in large part due to this new game mode. On the other side of the aisle, there are those who believe Domination has no business replacing regular land battles as the default mode in Ranked, and think that it's a downgrade from a spectator and competitive standpoint. Whatever reasons you have for liking or disliking Domination Mode, we can generally all agree its current implementation is not perfect. So that will be the topic we cover today, as we ready ourselves for the Storm of Slaanesh dropping tomorrow. Personally, I think this new game mode is a great blueprint for the future of Total War multiplayer and has a lot going for it. But as I said in my overview video, it will, without question, undergo some growing pains here, and there are elements of its design and overall balance that will likely need to change as we move forward. So in the spirit of friendly discussion and debate, I sat down with Anticity yesterday, widely considered to be one of the best competitive players in the world at the moment, to talk about Domination Mode, what we like, what we dislike, and how to improve it as we edge closer to launch. We didn't agree on every facet, of course, and came into it with different perspectives and desires anyway, but generally speaking, I feel we're pretty much on the same page when it comes to the problems with Domination Mode and how to potentially address them. On the positive side, it's a huge boon for tournament hosts and content creators because it's a whole new topic to cover, crack open, and digest, and it's a self-policing one at that, meaning all those corner camping, forest camping, designated attacker, and annoying house rules that judges would previously have to subjectively enforce should make way less of an impact here and maybe dealt away with entirely. The simple fact is, when there are capture points on the map and unit caps are already in place, many of those house rule sets become redundant, and that should make lives way easier for both viewers, who won't have to question why someone got disqualified for a rule break, and for casters, who won't have to deal with players screeching in their ear about artificial protocols. If you're running streams, your life should be way easier now, and when your life is easier, the viewer experience is better too. Because you can focus on the content and the commentary and the discussion with those who are watching, not on backroom chats where players are accusing each other of cheating. Now, some of the maps are really interesting and tactically diverse here as well, better than anything we had in Warhammer 2, and terrain has a large impact, which is something many of us have been wanting to see for a while, because good maps make for dynamic gameplay. And finally, Domination Mode from start to finish is filled with choices, where the decisions you make in terms of unit positioning, when and where to summon reinforcements, which units to call upon, and so on, all matter a lot, which means it can be very cerebral in a way that Warhammer 2 land battles were not. In many ways, it's less micro-intensive than traditional land battles, and you certainly have more room for error, but there's more thinking involved here and less pure micro skill, which will possibly make it more appealing for players with big brains but poor APM. In our opinion, Domination is the more technical game mode, as the thing that primarily wins you games is decision making, rather than micro, which is the opposite of how land battles function, where individual troop movements and timing tend to prevail. And naturally, you're much less likely to lose before the battle even starts in Dom, because you can adjust on the fly to counter what your opponent's doing using reinforcements, rather than being stuck with a particular arm composition that isn't suited to the task. On the flip side though, there are quite a few elements and built-in features here that feel bad from a spectator's perspective and make Domination feel unreadable and counterintuitive at times, and these are at the core of what we think should be addressed before launch. Realistically, that won't happen, so I think the actual timetable would be sometime soon after launch. But by far the biggest offender at the moment is the comeback mechanic. Now remember that supplies for reinforcements are earned at a base rate of 16 per second, and that rate will change depending on how much damage you've dealt to your opponent and how much you're losing by. In its current implementation, if you are 2,000 points behind on VPs, you will gain an additional 50% income boost to supplies, so instead of 16 per second, you'll gain 24, that's 8 extra. If you are 4,000 points behind, that income boost will double again, becoming a 100% increase over the base rate. So instead of 16 per second, it will now be 32, which will be close to double what your opponent is earning. You might think that's not really a big deal because surely, if they have a 4,000 point victory lead, you were screwing up hard, you gave up map control, and you deserved to lose. Surely, they could just hold on to one objective and cruise to an easy win, even with all your extra supplies. Unfortunately, that is not the case. A feature which, in theory, is designed to make the game mode more competitive and allow an avenue for slower races with weaker starts to crawl their way back into a match, has the unintended consequence of encouraging players not to cap at all. In fact, in the current meta, at a high level anyway, it literally revolves around intentionally falling behind by thousands of points, getting that income boost, trading efficiently all the while, building up to a critical mass, then utterly steamrolling your opponent with the economic advantage you gained from losing. And this can get so egregious that you can wipe the enemy army wholesale, cap all 3 objectives, and still be receiving the supplies boost because you're still technically losing on VPs. Yeah, pretty silly. Now, this isn't as big a deal when both players are equally aware of how to game the system, but a newer player would rightfully cap all the points, think they're winning, then be utterly confused and turned off when they get dumpstered out of nowhere by a huge swarm of units that they can't hope to match. It's completely unintuitive and illogical and leads to situations where neither player wants to capture points at the start because it can give the other an income advantage. Domination mode, where players don't want to cap, is a self-defeating scenario. It's pointless. It makes no sense. In fact, Anticity regaled me with a tale where he put some of his own units past one of the objectives to essentially cut it off from his opponent's control, but did not cap it himself until his infantry was charged, was knocked back onto the point, accidentally capped it, and unintentionally he built the supplies of his adversary throughout the match, at which point he eventually got steamrolled. So a newer player beat an experienced top-level guy by accidentally stumbling on a broken strategy, the best strategy. Not great. It's pretty funny for now, but if that exists for a long time after launch, I don't think anybody's going to be laughing. It's fairly self-explanatory, but players who trade effectively early on and start capping points early should not lose because of that decision. It doesn't make any sense. So the simple solution is get rid of the comeback mechanic entirely, or at the very least severely nerf the extra supply gain you earn when an opponent holds more objectives and is beating you on VPs. Increase the size of starting armies if you have to help mitigate the snowball potential of maybe an early engagement gone wrong, but domination should be readable if you want new players to play it, and I can't think of any feature less readable than let your opponent win so you can win later. Completely unintuitive. Now, earlier on, I said some of the new maps are really good, and that is absolutely true. The problem is that the current map pool is freaking tiny. There are only 6 or 7 domination maps at the moment, and for people who are only playing that game mode, they're gonna get old very quickly. I think it's reasonable to launch this with a small selection to start, just because it was probably minimal investment on their part, and they want to gauge our reaction and see how popular it gets before fully taking the plunge. But honestly, I have my doubts they'll support it super frequently with balance updates and tons of new maps, even if it does perform well. So what we've suggested to the devs is that they allow map-making modders full access to the code required to build domination maps themselves. And in so doing, CA can vet and veto the ones that won't work or are too difficult to implement, but make use of all the crazy talented modders this community already has, and let them do most of the hard work here. The longevity of this game mode will increase exponentially if we get a steady influx of maps and content from modders that are officially approved and implemented by Creative Assembly. Maps that are bigger, that encourage different tactics, different approaches to warfare, that are balanced, fun, have unique skyboxes, and color palette swaps with unique terrain. All that work is ready to be utilized for free. CA just needs to let modders have at it. And in this case, they're multiplayer maps, so you don't have to worry about coding for the AI. But while some of the few maps we do have are really quite good, a few of them are quite terrible. Death Pass, in particular, has spawned so close to the central objective that if you try to outflank it, you'll have units spawning literally on your ass. Now at this point, Anticity's viewpoints and mine diverged somewhat. I raised the point in my first overview video that quite a few of my games end abruptly and somewhat anticlimactically, that it doesn't feel very good to finally get your greater demons and high-tier monsters out on the field and see these awesome clashes finally developing only for one player to reach 5,000 points and the game just end. that the pacing of Domination is somewhat wonky in its current form, that the early game feels a bit slow, and that the late game ends too quickly. That from a viewer's perspective, the most exciting time in the match, when everything is out on the field and the big units are coming out to play, doesn't really have room to breathe. I suggested some kind of overtime mechanic that shuts off reinforcements at the end of the game, allowing both armies to fight it out with whatever's still on the field, and then whoever's last man standing gets a small to moderate points boost in the same vein as free-for-all, where being last man standing doesn't give you the win, but it does give you some points and would allow a bit more comeback potential if you had a bad start, but finished really strong. Essentially, this would help factions that get the ball rolling slower once the end game rolls around, because naturally some races will have amazing starts, and others will have more difficulty establishing map control initially, but have powerful, expensive units that might give them a tactical edge later. And perhaps more importantly, would make the end of battles more interesting and exciting. Because that's kind of one of my big issues here, is I want my replays to be fun. So if we're getting to the point where we have these cool fights playing out, and then they just end, I don't like that. I want to avoid those anticlimactic situations where a Bloodthirster and Keeper of Secrets begin their duel only for the clock to run out and expire. Some form of overtime to mitigate those problems would be great. And I think Anticity was amenable to the idea as well. What he didn't fully agree with was a problem that I've noticed in many of my games, where spamming low-tier fodder onto the objectives seems to be a winning strategy. I've seen quite a few games now on both sides where one player is dominating all the engagements, killing lots of stuff, and has higher value units on the field, but simply cannot kill all these marauders and horrors and low-tier bullshit quickly enough to get them off the point, because infantry is so much stronger at capping than single entities or monsters. It feels kind of terrible when you've got a Bloodthirster, Skull Crushers, and Exalted Bloodletters holding a point, and then like 1,200 gold worth of blue horrors and fodder rapidly caps over all your stuff. It's a fully contested point. I've got way more value on that point, but yet you're capping and potentially winning the late game just by spamming fodder? That doesn't feel good, and from a readability perspective, if I'm a new player and see that I have a ton of value on a point, and he just has more models on it, but they're all low-tier bullshit, that's weird to me. Like, I'm not sure I'm going to fully understand why you're capping over me. It shouldn't just be a numbers game. Value is also important. A Bloodthirster is a much more important unit than a Blue Horror, but the Blue Horror will always cap over your stuff, even if you've got a decent amount of infantry there too. Anticity rightfully argued there's plenty of nuanced counterplay to this, like using flyers to stall them, pushing forward towards their spawn to delay them more, locking down the point with a bunch of fodder yourself so they can never flood it in the first place, or simply nuking them with tons of wave clear spells and abilities. And he's absolutely right that these are all viable tactics and heavily play into the important decisions you have to make at every stage of domination. But in my experience so far, elite infantry is too easily deleted by magic, so people tend to spam the cheapest infantry possible, and it makes for messy, ugly blob fights with low-tier infantry that doesn't necessarily make for incredibly interesting games all the time, where everybody's just suiciding on the point, and it feels less skillful and micro-intensive than I think an RTS like this should. Part of it is spectacle too. You don't want only low-tier infantry getting spammed out. You want to see a good mix of troops, and elite infantry are an important unit archetype that have kind of been thrown to the wayside for a while. They weren't particularly viable in Warhammer 2's meta. I would like to see a little bit more of that here now. And that, combined with the anticlimactic endings, kind of goes hand in hand to make for a less than stellar experience in more of these matches than I would like. I am sure once we all get more time under our belt and do a better job with army building and decision making, some of these elements will feel less pronounced, and there's no question that inexperience can exacerbate problems that may not exist once the meta is fully developed. But I can only speak to what I've seen and played so far, and to me, the really good matches are an absolute joy and are super exciting to watch and play, but more often than not, they end with a whimper rather than a bang. So I think Domination still needs some work here to get everybody on board, at least so that viewers can enjoy it better and so that it plays more intuitively. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Domination at the moment. Do let me know what your thoughts are on the game mode from what you've seen so far, and I will see you all tomorrow when we delve into the realm of Slaanesh. want to give a big shout out and thank you to Anticity for sitting down and talk with me. You can check out his channel and Discord link in the pinned comment below. He is an awesome player, YouTuber, and an overall swell guy. So, I will see you all next time. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.